this conversation that we have to have today is really kind of like, I don't know, it's so complicated because I'm probably not even going to like post this on YouTube for the foreseeable future. I haven't totally decided, right? Okay, so this is such a mess. Let's get into it. Okay, so as some of you may or may not know, there is currently a YouTube sort of blackout happening right now, right? A lot of people are boycotting YouTube at the moment because of their specific policies towards trying to make people prove their age and like forcing them to, post their government issued ID to prove their age, which I don't think I need to tell you is like not a good idea. Like, that's very, very bad. That is a very bad idea. That is a huge safety violation. It's a privacy violation. It is like a million and one problems, right? So, oh shit, hold on. This is gonna be tricky. Okay. I'm doing my microphone. Okay, hopefully, don't move. Okay. This is gonna be interesting. I'm like trying a new setup here. It's a whole big thing. God, I have such a headache because of this. Okay, so, I mean, essentially, like, I don't need to tell you why this is a terrible idea, right? But for those of you who don't know, it's a terrible idea because it's a safety hazard. It's a security issue waiting to happen. Like, let's be 100% real. You know, when Apple introduced the feature to add your ID card or your driver's license to Apple Wallet, I immediately had, like, this screams a huge cybersecurity incident waiting to happen. Information about you is already very publicly, easily found, right? But if you are, say, putting your identification card on your phone, if your phone gets stolen and someone has access to get onto your phone because your password is just 1234, something equally easy to guess, they're now going to have your driver's license and your identification information and anything else that's associated with your phone. And so that's just like not a great idea, right? That's already damaging. But a site like YouTube/Google having access to your identification information equally is like a cybersecurity incident waiting to happen. There's no reason that they need that. Like, they're trying to use the argument that it's protecting children, but like, we all know, A, that's not true, but B, you already have processes in place. Like, YouTube is already a website that does not allow sexually explicit material. Yeah, they had that incident a couple years ago with the pregnant Elsa shit, and that's like its own rabbit hole that I will not get into, but like, generally speaking, explicit material is not really allowed on the platform. There's ways to skirt it, there's ways to like imply things, but the reality of the situation is just like, it's not really allowed. So, and there is a specific app just for kids. There is YouTube Kids that does already exist. You can put parental controls on, what your children can access on YouTube already without adding to this, identification requirement, right? So for me, the question becomes, what is this really about? Who is this really for? And who is this going to harm, right? Because there are a lot of people who are dependent on YouTube. I'm kind of, in a way, one of the lucky ones because despite the fact that I've been doing this for 8 years and despite the fact that I have a following of almost 2,000, I'm not really dependent on YouTube. It really doesn't bring me much in the way of money. Like, I probably have made, I'm going on my second $100 from YouTube in like a year and a half, 2 years, and I've been doing this for 8 years. So, I've been doing it for free for 8 years. And so for me, it's kind of like, yeah, it sucks because if I decide, and I, have kind of been feeling like, well, maybe I gotta quit. Maybe it's time to leave YouTube for something else. Maybe it's time to, come up with something else. If I do decide to leave YouTube for good, it is ultimately frustrating to me because that is where I have the majority of my fan base. I've worked hard to build up the platform that I have. And yes, it's not that big, but it's mine and I've worked hard for it, and it sucks that it would have to go away because of stupid shit that YouTube is doing. And so there is kind of a question that I have for my fellow online enjoyers, right? Online enjoyers? There's a question that I have for all of you, which is, in a situation like this, is it better to try and fight it from the inside or try and fight it from the outside, right? Because, and the reason I ask this is, obviously when something like this happens, right, everyone has kind of talked about, having this blackout, this YouTube, doing a, why can't I think of the word? Doing a YouTube boycott, right? And it's very unclear when it's going to happen. Obviously, it started yesterday because that's when these policies took place, but ultimately, when it ends is kind of up in the air. Is it going to end when YouTube actually decides to backpedal on this, which could take possibly months? Or does it end when, users decide they can't take it anymore and they miss the content that they used to get on YouTube, or people can't afford to lose that much money? You know what I mean? If someone's fortunate and has built up a fan base that, exists outside of YouTube, and they can kind of do like Patreon, and they can do TikTok, a lot of people have different options, although TikTok's about to go away, in the coming weeks as well. There's kind of a rumor that they're going to M2, which I will not be joining you on. So if TikTok goes away, goodbye. I will not be seeing you there either, which is unfortunate because I have sort of had a lot of fun over on TikTok, so that'll be great. It's so interesting because we are in such a frustrating moment in time in which I feel as though, I feel very conflicted, right? I feel very torn. I feel very frustrated, and trying to figure out what the best solution is in how to deal with this has been very, very tricky. And, I can show solidarity and, because look, the reality is if I were just to continue on, my fan base probably isn't going to be affected by this because the majority of people who watch me, according to my analytics, are like 18 to 25 anyway. So they're most likely not going to be affected. However, we all know that the people who get hit by things like this, the people whose content becomes labeled as adult and therefore unwatchable, is who? The LGBT community, right? These are the people whose content is going to be unwatchable. And it frustrates me to no end because, again, there are already things in place, right? There are already security measures, as it were, in place. This is not something that, hasn't already existed. This is not something that hasn't already been accounted for, right? So you're kind of trying to solve a problem that is already being solved. You know what I mean? You're trying to solve something that is not an issue to begin with. And I find that very suspicious. I find that very troublesome because I have to wonder, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? If you're trying to solve a problem that is not really a problem in the first place and that is not an issue that needs to be solved, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? And so I just find this all very, very frustrating. And I don't know what the solution is. I don't know. I do know that this is, bullshit. I know that this is ultimately not only going to cause more harm to, LGBT people who are going to continue to be labeled as adult content, but it's also going to harm young people, because as much as companies and parents and, conservative groups like to say that they're here for protecting the children, it's never really about that, right? It's always about control. And it doesn't stop at, making people prove they're 18 to access certain content. It isn't going to stop there. It certainly doesn't, it starts there, but it doesn't stop there. We know that it doesn't stop there. And the problem that I have is that when you use the defense of, think of the children, it's a very lovely defense, right? It's very hard to argue against. Most people would like to say that they care about children. They don't, most people, because the reality is, if you actually cared about and were concerned about children beyond, the visage of, caring about children, you would maybe care about, making sure that single mothers and single parents have access to social safety nets and to food. You wouldn't defund education. You wouldn't defund PBS that gives away free education. You certainly wouldn't defund school lunches or art programs or music programs, all of which we know and have evidence to prove help people and give people positive outcomes and make a huge difference in people's lives. Like, all of these things that constantly are under threat, all of these things that are constantly pushed back against, you can't actually say that you care about children if you're against those things. You just can't. You cannot sit there and bullshit me to my face and say, oh, we just care about the children, but, you constantly do things that actively cause harm to children. You know what I mean? You can't say you care about children and then everything else we're seeing right now, oh God, it's so irritating and frustrating. And I will admit, it's been surprisingly difficult, not having logged on to YouTube at all in the last couple days. It's been surprisingly hard. That was kind of my main thing, I almost never use Netflix. I almost never use, Amazon Prime or Hulu or any of the other streaming services. I almost exclusively use YouTube to watch anything. And so I didn't realize how difficult that was going to be just on its own. And, taking out my own, difficulties with that, because that's not the most important thing in this, it is just kind of listen, I'm all for doing a detox. I'm all for, kind of trying to do what we can to fight against the bullshit, right? I think it is very, very vitally important to fight policies like this that are ultimately going to cause more harm than they could ever cause good, right? I think that is very vitally important. That being said, I don't know. I don't know if this is something that should be fought on the inside or from the outside. I don't know that trying to, fight YouTube from outside of the system is really going to make the difference. I don't know if trying to fight outside of the system is going to necessarily help as much as I think we'd like it to. I don't necessarily know that this is going to, there's so much that's unclear, right? There's so much that's unclear. There's so much that it's tricky. There are certainly other websites out there. Obviously, Vimeo is still a website that exists. Twitch, for all of its own problems, does also exist. I have been thinking about, doing live Write With Me sessions, maybe even gaming, probably cozy games. I'm not someone who I think can do difficult, challenging games. I've never been great at video games, so that's its own thing. But I do kind of feel as though, I have to wonder, what is the game plan here? What is the next step? Because a boycott, it feels good, but I don't know how much it actually actively helps. You know what I mean? And I don't even know if enough people even know about this to participate in a big enough way that it would actually make a difference. You know what I mean? Like, typically with boycotts, for them, in order for them to make a difference, right? Like, the reason something like the Target boycott has really made a difference is because a lot of people knew about it. It was something that, like, people were talking about in churches. It was something people were talking about, you know, not just online, but in person. Like, this was something that was really being discussed quite widely. I had no idea there was even going to be a YouTube boycott until, like, midnight the day of. Like, that's how little anyone has talked about this. And it's something that I was actually thinking about prior to that. Like, earlier that day, I was thinking about, you know, should there be a boycott? Is that something that would make a difference? Is that something that would be beneficial? I still don't really know the answer to that question, and I don't know if we can ever know the answer to that question, because YouTube has billions of people who go on the site every single day, and billions of people who upload, and some people who maybe agree with their decision who aren't going to be bothered by it. And so it does beg the question, you know, is it going to make a difference? You know what I mean? Is it ultimately going to... Is there going to be enough people for it to change the policy? Or is it just going to be, like, just what it is, and it's going to have to be litigated by the courts? And really, this is a subject that, for all intents and purposes, is just kind of something we're just kind of doing to, like, show solidarity and show that we're concerned, but that isn't going to have a profound effect on YouTube one way or the other. It's going to have to be litigated some other way. And a lot of, you know, unfortunately, this is something that a lot of countries are doing. The UK is doing this right now. You know, so censorship laws like this, I think, are a dime a dozen. And of course, you know, we're just in a Christo-fascist state right now. That's not unique to America. A lot of places are dealing with that right now. A lot of places are falling further and further into this world, and so it's very frustrating. And, you know, it's funny, right? Because there is part of me that thought about this and thought, you know, there is something to be said about a boycott, right? But there is also something to be said about, like, you know, making your voice heard within a system, right? There's something to be said about using your voice within the system that you're in and trying to fight and make change. And that's not something that's easy to do when you're, you know, actively boycotting and protesting something. So, like, if I don't post this on YouTube, there's 1,500 people who follow me who are not going to see this message, because most of them do not follow me elsewhere on the internet. Like, close friends do, sure. But, like, a lot of people do not follow me elsewhere on the internet. People on TikTok might see this. People on my Tumblr might see this, obviously, if I post it to those places. But there's a significant number of people who follow me just on YouTube who are simply never going to see this message. And so, like, that's a concern of mine, too. I think that's, like, there's just so much stuff, and there's so many things going on all the time. And it's all very frustrating, and it's all very tiresome, and it's all very... It's, you know, it's meant to wear you down, right? And I think we've got to find joy where we can. We've got to find happiness where we can. And I think YouTube is a source of joy for a lot of people, as much as it's, you know... difficult, as much as it is challenging, as much as it is a place that is frustrating a lot of the times. It is also a source of joy for a lot of people. And in fact, it's a source of joy for me many times. Like, YouTube is a space of joy for a lot of people. So, that's the other thing. I don't want to take that away from anyone. I feel like... I'm just so torn. I still love making content, and I don't want to stop making videos. Like, obviously, I actually have a plan I haven't talked about this yet, but I am working on creating more content and like focusing, not like just YouTube content, focusing on blogging again, because that's something I really, really enjoy. And I definitely want to, I'm planning out content for, the next year, from September 25 to September 26. Years. God. Okay. I'm planning out my content from September of 2025 to September of 2026. So I'm really working on creating a plethora of content. So I'm working on creating more content that is focused on, writing, focused on blogs. I'm going to be doing kind of daily things. So, Monday is going to be one type of content. Tuesday is going to be one type of content. Thursday will continue to be my blogs or not blogs, excuse me, my videos and also my podcast. Friday is going to be its own thing. So I kind of, I'm planning all this content for the coming year. I'm planning all of these things and I'm very, very excited about it. But, when it comes to, this channel and what happens next, I feel very up in the air because, and I think a lot of people do. I think the problem with YouTube and platforms like it is when something is so big and it's owned by kind of a singular entity, I feel as though it becomes something that, it becomes something that's very tenuous for a lot of people, right? The nature of, a singular company owning so many other companies, like Google owning YouTube and Chrome and, Blogger and every other website that they own and every other service that they offer, calling them a monopoly is kind of a understatement at this point. But I think what's frustrating is that you realize, like, when people are so dependent on a singular service, right? People who make content like I do, like videos specifically, because so many of us are so, like, in the YouTube ecosystem, we are very much locked in to YouTube. You're locked into it. You're dependent on it. And so it puts you in a very precarious position when they decide to do something that you don't agree with, because ultimately you kind of feel trapped, right? Because, as I've said, YouTube is where my biggest audience is. So I very explicitly kind of feel like if I were to stop doing YouTube, that entire audience is just gone. That entire group of people that I have built up, those, that closeness and friendships and all of those things, like, that's just gone. And I think for a lot of people, that is the case. There's so much that, we kind of feel trapped in this ecosystem. And it's very hard not to be frustrated by that. It's very hard not to find that incredibly, incredibly frustrating, And I think for a lot of us, especially now, we need those communities, right? Whatever else you can say about YouTube, this is a community of people that I have built up. It's a small community, but it is a community. It's a community that I'm trying to continue to build up. And unfortunately, because of the nature of Google owning YouTube and the decisions that Google has made, I am very much, bless you, I am kind of dependent on, this part, this company for this community. And I'm hoping that, in future, the blog will be able to take that over and I won't feel so dependent on YouTube, and I'll kind of be able to build a community on my own terms so that I'm not dependent on something like TikTok, which, again, can go away in a matter of weeks and months. Something like YouTube, which, I feel very beholden to in a lot of ways. Is something like Spotify, which currently hosts my podcast, because for a long time, finding podcast hosts that weren't costly was not possible. And so there's all of these services and things that, like, I don't want to support, but I feel very stuck with them. I feel very beholden to them. I mean, even something like WordPress now owns Tumblr, and Tumblr is a place where I've, over the decades, built a very large platform and fan base and friendships and communities, and that's kind of being swallowed up. And then, of course, WordPress is who I use for my blog and who I continue to use because I do actually like WordPress despite some of the things that they do and the decisions they make. But again, it's hard not to feel beholden to all of these companies and all of these industries. And that is unfortunately where the frustration lies, because while I have learned coding and I like coding to some degree, I don't know that I'm good enough to really, create my own website. I don't know that I have the skills right now to do what I would like to do if I was going to create my own website. And so ultimately, it's going to be, I'm beholden to another company. It's just, technically under my own name and technically under my own branding, but essentially I am beholden to yet another company. And that is so frustrating that, like, realistically, so many of us, even though, if you are fortunate enough to be your own boss and you are fortunate enough to not work in the traditional sense for a big company, if you're a self-published author, and you're not beholden to, let's say, one of the big 6 publishers or any publisher at this point because you're self-publishing yourself, you're ultimately still beholden to who? Amazon, because Amazon has the largest ebook repository. Barnes & Noble kind of has something with the Nook, but it really is nothing comparison. Like, there is no comparison. Bookshop.org does, offer, I think, ebooks that are their own thing, but again, not enough people are going to use that. You kind of can't afford, as a small business, as a, indie author, you can't afford to ignore something like Amazon. You can't afford to ignore something like TikTok. You can't afford to ignore something like Instagram. As someone who is a writer first and foremost, and that is what I love doing, I would much prefer not to have social media and just to write and just to do my own thing. I would much prefer that. I mean, I like making YouTube videos, don't get me wrong, and I would still continue to do that. But, like, my ideal world would just be focusing on writing. I cannot stand social media. I cannot stand Twitter and Threads and Blue Sky and Instagram and TikTok and all of it. I just cannot stand it. I hate to sound like somebody's boomer grandmother, but truly, 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 the older I get, the more of a Luddite I've become, I think. I really cannot stand most technology. I really just don't want to deal with it 9 times out of 10. I really don't. And in fact, by the way, speaking of WordPress and weird decisions they've made, I don't know who told them that when you're making something on WordPress.com, that the font that they should force you to endure when you're writing a post is fucking, Helvetica New at its absolute thinnest? So I'm squinting to read this font? Like, that's not what that's for. You can use it for, like, small things. But, like, writing a blog post with that is so unbearable that it's not even funny. And so I'm sitting there trying to, and, like, yeah, probably I can write a fucking blog post in an alternate, document app. I certainly have them. But, like, come on now. Why are you fucking forcing me to use this god-awful font that I cannot see? Like, what is that about? Sorry, that's a whole other tangent. I'm just... So, I mean, you see my frustration, right? Like, ultimately, we're in this situation where, no matter what you do when you are trying to not be beholden to one person, you are ultimately still beholden to these companies, right? Even if you don't directly work for any given company or any given industry, you are ultimately still beholden to some company somewhere, right? And that's what kind of sucks, is that there almost truly is no, like, fully indie option anymore. Like, you can't afford to miss certain opportunities. You can't afford to, I mean, even if you have, you want to have all these morals and the high ground and all of this, you can't afford to skip certain things. You cannot afford to, like, you can't like, even if you have the highest moral standards that you possibly can, there's ultimately, like, you can't afford to miss certain things. You can't afford to not do certain things. So it's like you could either work for a company that screws you over, or you can be your own business being screwed over by a different company in a different way. And those are kind of your options in the world. And it's very, very frustrating, and it's very, very tiresome. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. I feel very stuck, right? And this conversation that I'm trying to have here about YouTube and their policies and the changes that they're making, I don't agree with them. I think they are very, like, obviously bad and obviously dangerous and obviously a problem and obviously going to make things a lot worse for a lot of people. And at the same time, at the same time, it's like, ultimately, we are all very just beholden to shit. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you can use NeoCities, although I've heard things about them, so it's like you can use NecoCities if they're not completely broken. I don't even know. There's like slight options, but really, we're all kind of just bogged down into one fucking thing at this point. We're all kind of just beholden to one fucking asshole company over another. I'm trying to get rid of Google Keep, and then some people are talking about, because I use Microsoft OneNote for a lot of things, because I really like OneNote, and some people are saying, like, that can be a problem. You can get locked out of your Microsoft account, so really you should keep stuff locally. And it's like, well, I need to be able to access it anywhere. That's part of the convenience that I enjoy of Google Keep. So it's just like, it really gets to a point where you just feel as though it's almost like there is no escape from a lot of the bullshit, right? You can, like, sorry. I don't want to get, not existential. I don't want to get doomeristic, right? I don't want to be doom and gloom. I do want to be hopeful. I do think, again, the communities that you can build on sites like this are hugely important, and I don't think they should be discounted. I just wish there were more viable options for people who kind of want to work outside of these things. And it's frustrating when it feels like there just isn't that option. There just isn't that ability. It's frustrating knowing that we're kind of beholden to so many of these websites, even though they have, helped build things and they have helped build communities for people. And even though I appreciate that, and I am deeply appreciative of, the communities that I built on, a platform like YouTube, and even TikTok to a lesser degree, and Instagram, and Tumblr, and all of these places, and Archive of Our Own, even, really. As much as I'm grateful for that, it's frustrating how many spaces are kind of owned by such large companies that you become very beholden to that. You become very beholden to the whims of some individual company. And so even if you don't agree with what they're doing, because you've built your platform with them, often before they did whatever thing that they did that made it so you feel this way, you become kind of beholden to that. And, if people are fortunate enough that they can, focus on Patreon only, that's certainly great. I love Patreon. I think it's a great opportunity. But, right now I don't have a large enough base on Patreon to make it so I would be able to just stop making content on YouTube and just go to Patreon exclusively. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not really in a position where I can kind of focus on just one thing or the other. It would be great... Stop, baby. It would be great if, you know, we could just make stuff and money didn't matter. You know, if I could just make content and make stuff that it didn't matter if I made money off of it. You know what I mean? That would be great. I think it would be great if I didn't have to worry about making money. It would be great if I didn't have to worry about, you know, paying bills. If you could just, you know, make stuff and that would be enough. Or, like, you know, have some great grand patron of the arts who keeps you afloat. That would be great. That would be lovely. That would be fantastic. But that's just not the way things are. And so, you know, it's frustrating. It's very, very frustrating, and it's very tiresome, and yeah, I don't know. And so, like, I guess my point in all of this is, excuse me, I guess my point in all of this is that I don't necessarily have a solution, you know? I don't necessarily know what the answer is. I don't know if there is an answer to all of this. I think one of the, you know, great challenges is just kind of figuring out what we do about all of this. You know, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I would love to know what you guys think. I would love to know what you think the best solution is going to be with this going forward. And I hope that you will join me on my blog as I kind of focus on that in the coming months. Like I said, I am planning to sort of push everything out starting September 1st. But again, given the situation with YouTube, I don't know what that's gonna be and what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna try and maybe simultaneously post things to YouTube and Vimeo, so at least I have like a secondary option. WordPress doesn't... I mean, it depends on who your host is. I guess some hosts give you a little bit more options than others. But, like, I don't know what the situation is going to be about, like, hosting videos directly onto my website. That can be a little bit challenging because videos take up a lot of space. So, yeah, I don't know what... I mean, that's kind of the other thing, too, is, like, YouTube really lets you host shit on their site without charging you for it. So that's kind of nice. As far as, like, hosting videos, you know, unless you have your own servers, which is very expensive, I might add, that gets challenging to do on your own. So, yeah, I think I'm going to try and definitely... I'm going to focus on the blog either way. But I truly don't know what's going to happen with my channel. I don't know what's going to happen with any of it. I feel very up in the air, and that's a strange place. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. I'd love to hear your opinions, suggestions even for, like, where to go next. And, yeah, until next time, stay devilish and see you next... Oh, you know what? I didn't do my gratitude and I didn't do my affirmation. So I think my gratitude for this week is I am very grateful for the community that I have built through all of social media platforms, right? I am very grateful to those communities. I am very grateful to what I have been able to accomplish. I do really, truly appreciate it in a way that you cannot possibly understand. Because it does mean a lot to me. And the people who, you know, enjoy what I do and enjoy the work that I put out and appreciate me and appreciate my work, I am so, so, so incredibly grateful because I love what I do. And, you know, this is something, I do it because I enjoy it, right? It's a labor of love. You know, would that paid bills, certainly, but, you know, I do it because it's a labor of love, right? But that being said, all things being equal, you know, it's hard. It's very, very hard sometimes because you feel very beholden to these sites. You feel very beholden to their whims, and if they just decide to close everything down or boot you out for any reason, you know, if I were to be banned by YouTube at any point, you know, all of that work, it would just be gone, and that is a horrifying thought and a frustrating thought. So that is not without its own considerations, I suppose. But yeah, that is kind of the problem too, is like, when you become beholden to these services, if I were to be banned for one reason or another for speaking out against them, that is certainly its own potential problem now, isn't it? Lots to consider. Oh, and so that was my gratitude. My affirmation is that I am going to continue to talk about these things regardless. I'm going to continue to say my piece and say how I feel and fight for what I believe is the right thing to do. And I'm going to continue to focus on, you know, putting my work out there in any way that I can, and I hope that you will join me. Okay? And until next time, stay devilish and see you next Thursday.